Let me see that question here. Okay, what are the three things that a Kanaka can use as a reference to find their Ohana lands and make a claim on them? I'm not sure who will be most capable of answering that question or addressing it.
Umi, you want to take that one?
Yes, please. Yeah?
I'll jump in. That's a longer question than I can provide here. In my estimation, there's a huge misunderstanding with royal patent grants and land patent grants and what those things mean today. I have a very different explanation. I agree that rights were secured to Hawaiians. My avenue for that protection is not the royal patent grants and not the land patent grants. So whoever has that question can email me separately, preza@hawaii.edu, and I can give a more nuanced answer. But for the sake of time and brevity, that's a really, really big question.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Another question was, what indicators should we look for to inform us that our lahui is starting to wake up? I guess there will be more Kaleko, I think, because they came in this morning.
Well, yeah, aloha nui. Well, I don't know about call it indicators, but I guess we just look at recent history, and we can just look at. I'll start off just with the scholarship the things that have been shared in the last, I mean, not counting today, of course, but I think you just look at the scholarship awareness of our own people to do the kind of necessary research and investigation on identifying the resources that are out there to identify and understand the history, especially in regards to the original source material, that we no longer, for example, get stuck, just looking back at Tekindal Mara wrote in, some historical piece. But in fact, when you look at the level of scholarship that's going on today, I mean, I'm so impressed. The depth of knowledge that's out there, the expertise that's out there. And I think what's even more wonderful than expertise is that, yes, there's a lot of information that needs to be clarified, like the previous question in regards to royal patent. I think that's part of it. But at least people are asking the questions. So I always look at the fact that although they may be kind of off the trail a little bit, perhaps, the fact is at least they're looking for the trail. And even laku ʻokoʻa, like I said, let's look at laku ʻokoʻa. Like I said, I remember a time 25 years ago where basically, there was a room of 12 of us, like I said, and I wouldn't even use the word celebration, just acknowledging the historical fact. This is before even having the so-called ku'e petitions being relocated again. We come from that time when these were still yet kind of rumors. But with the work that's been going on, now today you can actually get a copy of the so-called proclamation from 1843. You can actually find your kupuna on those lists, and so that ability for our scholars today to go out and get the physical evidence, to me, is the key to the awareness. And that's why I'm I'm really optimistic when I look at what's going on there. When I look at my own children, when I look at students that I teach today, I get students that come in at 18 years old and know a lot more about our history that went on 25 years ago. So we've definitely taken huge leaps and bounds, and I can only imagine what the next 10 years are going to be like. So, and this is not even counting the so-called political uprising, the consciousness, of course, recently witnessed up in Mauna Kea, where led by many young people that stepped forward. And I think if there's an indicator, I mean, it's the indicator. our people are standing. Our people are the desire, the honor to one. Is to me, it's the key level. And I get turned on just listening to all of the stuff that was shared earlier today, and I learn every day. I learn myself, and I've been in this game for quite a long time. But I tell people I learn every day. And so with that, I just want to commend all of you who put this together, especially all the scholars out there that shared and will be sharing also, and that education is the key. As long as we seek the truth and we continue to seek the truth, we're on the right path.
So. What more can we, as those that are awake, do to nudge our lahui to rouse from their own slumber? I think this is another Kaleko question.
Oh, I don't know. I think Manu can get this one.
Troublemaker. I think one thing I would consider important is that we use the proper vocabulary. That's sort of the first stepping stone, is that you force yourself to rethink things through before you say something. What I mean by that is, like, it took me a while after Kekuni Blaisdell told me, he kept calling continent, and this was when I was just a kid, and he would call, Hawai'i, the mainland. I was really impressed by his fortitude, and I told myself, I am gonna from now on not call this place will always be the mainland. I'm not gonna call the continent, the mainland anymore. It took a lot of reconditioning and deprogramming to be able to do that. And so I know that it's not easy, but that's just one example. There's a lot of vocabulary that we know of now, colonization versus, occupation, that we should be interjecting into our conversations so people who do not know any better will start catching on. I remember from various conversations I had with the president, Dave McLean for UH, and I kept saying, the continent, and this is our mainland in all of our conversations. And I heard him in a speech once say, well, people on the continent, da 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 da. And so even he, as a po'e haole and a leader, had thought about that deeply and had, at least for that time, said it correctly. So I think vocabulary is super important as a starting point. Kalekoa, anything to add? Or shall we pass the baton to Umi?
I just had a real quick 2 cents to that, because I think it's important. One of my mentors, Kihei Soliniheo, I used to go out organizing with in a community, and he used to always say, and I was told, he used to always say, you cannot feed baby steak. What he meant was, sometimes we get so possessed with the truth that we have all this information, all this evidence that we have, and we got to remember when we're talking to our people, sometimes you cannot just pour everything, or try to attempt to pour everything onto them at one time. That it's a process, that our people, it's a process, right? I mean, I wish I could have learned everything in one day and get all the truth in 24 hours, but it doesn't happen that way. And what he meant was, sometimes it's just giving just a little bit of ego, just a little bit of truth. And all you're doing is just giving them just enough, like the babies when they learn to chew. You want them to get the honor, because once they get that honor, they're going to want to eat by themselves. And so the real methodology, in a sense, of raising the consciousness of the people is to remember that like a baby, we have to give them just enough that they can take, not too much where they're going to choke, not too much where they might burp it up, but just enough where they're going to have that honor. And in my own lifetime, I can say I've witnessed that many occasions. And so when we teach our people, we educate our people, we must at all times remember that we gotta be unafraid, in fact, also to tell the truth. We gotta be unafraid to say we are an occupied country. We have to be unafraid to say that these are lands that belong to the Hawaiian Kingdom, whether you call them government or crown lands. And so at all times we challenge that kind of rhetoric that seems to hide our history. But at the same time, we have to explain to our people in a way that never, we can never make our people feel bad for not knowing what they don't know. See that, and that's a big important lesson. There's no need to go show off that I know and you don't know. Therefore, I'm gonna put all of this on you and to really prove that you don't know. We gotta accept there's many but people. Franz Fanon called it, cognitive dissonance. That they've been so trained and tamed and controlled for so long that it's a difficult process to give up 20, 30, 40 years of a particular way of thinking and training. And so like that, sometimes, you don't have to go with the sledgehammer. Sometimes it's like pulling the thread off the clothing. And so it's a kind of subtle way of always moving with love and compassion for our fellow Kanaka. And with that, understanding that the goal is never I'm going to convince you by pounding you over the head with all this information. But the goal, in fact, is to lead them on their own process, lead them on their own path. So they get that ono. And so they're going to want to taste and eat for themselves. And that's kind of the way I look at the methodology of working with our people.
Bobby, I just add a quick one too.
Sure.
Off of what Kaleko was talking about, like, this has been a long process for all of us, right? Like, if you're gonna master your craft, whatever that craft is, if you're a lawai'a, if you're a mahi'ai, that takes years, right? So like there's a long journey along, like Kalekoa and those of us on the panel, we didn't watch one presentation and then we got it. It was months, years, still ongoing. It's that cycle of, right? Like I've listened to the same people talk over and over, and then each time I listen to them talk, I still learn, but it's the 1% of the 1% now, right? I'm not, my cup is full to here now, but I still learn every time I listen to someone talk. So for me, it's those cycles, those repetitions, right? Like you go to hula practice and you're doing kaholo for the first 30 minutes, right? Like it's the basics. It's just that repetition. You cannot escape the basics. You cannot escape the repetition. The sun rises, the sun sets, the sun rises, the sun sets. That's the constants, right? What can we do? Get that kind of constants. Be as reliable as the sun, and it comes up every morning and it sets every night, and and in whatever it is you do, you don't have to do what I do or what Kalekoa does. Whatever you do, become proficient, become a master of that, and in that constance we get that ike.
Thank you, Donovan. Okay, another question just popped up is Mauna Kea or the lands around Mauna Kea crown land?
Umi.
The only question.
It is, and I think Donovan's look at the crown lands is very, very important. I mean, that question of private and public is just this amazing gaping hole in the narrative. I actually had a slide where I do a genealogy of the crown lands, and there are these gaps in it. So the chain of title is broken on the crown lands as far as we can tell. So Mauna Kea is in so many ways a symbol, but it's really a symbol on a literal legal level of for the whole crown lands. I totally agree with what Donovan said. Like, why give back what remains of the crown lands? Like Sam King said, if you're going to give back give back the whole thing, because there's this fundamental break. Yeah, that's all I want to say about that.
Okay, thank you. Going back to vocabulary, Manu, you talk about in the term indigenous. That's a question that comes up a lot about Hawaiians in their confusion as to whether they are indigenous or not. Can you spend a little bit more time on that?
Okay. Indigenous is a more modern term It came along as my understanding of it as a definition for people from non-self-governing territories who have been taken over by imperialists or whoever. They tend to be represented by Native Americans, for example, who may not have had treaties that exemplified an independent relationship from one country to another, unlike the Hawaiian Kingdom. Now, for us who are nationals of the Hawaiian Kingdom, you know, I don't even like to say, oh, we're indigenous. Yes, we're Aboriginal. Yes, we're Native. But because that first use of that term implied that you came from a non-self-governing territory, that's not us. We come from the Hawaiian Kingdom, which means that we should, at every opportunity, not use that to describe ourselves. When I was a kid, that word wasn't even on the radar screen. I know that was a long time ago, but we never called ourselves indigenous. This is a new thing. This is a new thing, and I even know how it was brought to Hawaii. We used to call ourselves Native Hawaiians. We used to argue that capital N, little n, that whole 9 yards. We knew we were Aboriginal people of this place, but this is a more new term. And I realized that people want to relate to their Aboriginal blood and consider themselves indigenous. But all I'm saying is that what it does is it kind of negates all of the very good successes that our kingdom accomplished, education-wise, just so many ways of being a progressive kingdom. And when you claim as a Hawaiian that you're indigenous, it's like you're just ignoring the fact that you had a Native Hawaiian kingdom, which is exactly what the treasonous imperialists, those people who came in, Americans, want us to do. They want us to forget that history. I'm hoping like someone else can maybe help me explain that a little clearer.
I'll just add something. I'd said in my presentation that I would come back to the point about Tonga that I mentioned at the beginning. So I'll do that now. Tonga is an independent state, and yet they're Aboriginal to Tonga. They are natives of Tonga. All the citizenry are the natives, and yet you never ever see them in the Indigenous Rights Forum at the United Nations, ever. They don't belong to it. They don't go to it. They have nothing to do with it, even though they are indigenous in the sense of being native. That's because they have governance. They have their own, they control their own state. And so in the same way that Donovan was bringing up in his presentation, that Hawaiians had governance and they could do these things that can protect the things that need to be protected, Tonga can do that without having to appeal to the UN for rights within their own country. Because, you know, one of the books that I have a chapter in is called Native Nations, and the subtitle is The Survival of Fourth World Peoples. And you rarely hear that term fourth world. The first world is the developed countries. The second world doesn't really exist anywhere. It's the Soviet, the communist countries. The third world is developing countries. And then the fourth world were these repressed people within the third world who are even lower, like indigenous people in Brazil, are below the citizens of Brazil. They're suffering more. So they're considered the fourth world. And so it was a bit anachronistic, you might say, to put a chapter about Hawaii in a book that's subtitled Survival of Fourth World Peoples. But that's where we're at, and we have to start explaining the difference. And that's where discussions like this are important. Get all those distinctions out.
Yeah.
I'd like to like to jump in with a metaphor here, because in a lot of ways the essence of this question drives me crazy, but it doesn't have to be divisive. And the way I see it used to divide camps. Oh, that's those state guys, that's those and it doesn't have to be that way. And my bridge for that is is this question: is an ʻowama a veke? We got two different words. Same species of fish, two different words. Why do we have two different words? Because in language there is life, in language there is death, right? Another conversation I had with my friend Mahi'ai, who teaches Olelo Hawai'i, he shared with me a conversation he had with Paniolo, who talked about 30, 40, 50 different words for the word fall, right? If words don't matter, if the difference between indigenous and aboriginal doesn't matter, then let's just call all of them haule, or, right? To carry something, hapai, right? But if I carry a backpack, that's a different word. That's a different kind of carrying, right? Our ancestors were precise in their language, right? If I'm hapaiing something, I don't have hands free to defend myself. If I'm carrying a backpack, I can still defend myself, right? The context matters. If I'm hapaiing something, I'm sorry, I can't help you carry anything else. My hands are full, right? So for me, it's not academics, it's not semantics, this is cultural. Our ancestors were precise in their language, right? But the way we use it, we don't have to use it as a tool to separate and make camps. Just acknowledge that ike of our ancestors, right? Like, hey, in language there is life, in language there is death. If you use one word, something is living and something is dying. Be aware of that, be conscious of that. I choose not to kill certain things with the language I choose to use. I choose to give life to certain things with the language I choose to use. And the more conscious and the more aware, I don't expect everyone to be, I don't know the 30 or 40 or 50 different words for fall. When I take a class from Kalekoa, I'm going to mess it up and say haule when it should be something else. And I expect to get corrected, right? We want to get back to that precision of our ancestors and that use of language in my mind, right? For me, that's what makes our ancestors brilliant, is that precision of observation. They paid attention. Today, we're stuck with broad stroke generalities, right, as part of our occupation. So I think it's really important, but I also don't think we need to like throw it in people's faces and be like, hey, you don't know the difference between this and that, or and the way I see it used, I don't like that, but I think it's very important, and I think it's culturally significant to maintain those types of distinctions and precision in language.
Yeah, I'd like to just add on that real quick. That for me, it's been I see it as a lot more complicated than I think some people like to make it easy. And this is just my own 2 cents. And that's why when I speak, I'm generally exactly, I think what does, I be precise. I say, well, according to international law, if we're talking Article 73, that I'm very clear that this is what I'm talking about. Because I give example when Umi was speaking about Tonga. See, this reminded me with a kind of big conversation I had with some other so-called nationalist Hawaiians in the past. I'd gone to Tonga, stayed there for 10 days. And what was interesting about Tonga was on a Sunday, it was the hottest place I ever been in my life, to be honest. I mean, I was suffering, right? I gotta go swim. So I walk all the way down to the pier, all the way to the ocean to go swim. And I get there ready to go swim. And what do I see? I see the Tongans swimming in the water with long sleeve shirts and long pants and in full dresses. And I look at that and I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? So my analysis, of course, yes, they're independent nation state. They have their language as their first language. And they're although we are cousins as Polynesians, we have a very different political history. And therefore, in other words, they're not dealing with issues like language revitalization. They do not have an occupying foreign power that has imposed these kinds of horrific genocidal deculturalization programs upon their people in many ways. But yet, because I asked my friends, I said, what do you call that? Because, we cannot call it colonization. Well, what are you going to call it? There's something wrong when I see Polynesians. In other words, they're still independent, but there definitely is some kind of sickness that's going on in those minds. Now, I've had fights with Tongans myself over this question, so this is not the first time I've spoken about this. But my point is, I think it's a lot more complicated sometimes that we try to affix ideas to these particular meanings without kind of realizing even words like colonization gets really, are we talking mental colonization? Are we talking political colonization? you wanna call it. There's all these different kind of words, and I think what we should do, in fact, is always be clear of how we are using those particular words. Now, the difficulty, of course, for the masses of our people, right? Many of our people still have they still have yet to kind of understand and appreciate the differences in some of these meanings. But my point is, I think it's a lot more. I think there's a lot of language we have yet to create. In other words, I can look at myself and I can look at that our cousins from Tonga, we're both Oiwi to our lands. You know, in our own language, we're both Maoli, we're both Oiwi, but our histories are so different that the context, I think what Donna said, the context of our situations are different, just like ourselves and with so-called Native Americans. You know, the similarity, of course, the same horrific programming that was done to American Indians were done to us also in many ways. And so we may have different political histories, but I tell them the poison is still the same. You see, there's the same kind of poison that was being put on us. Now, how to fix ourselves out of that poison or the medicine to use may be a little bit different. You know, it might be a little bit different because of our political histories are different. But they still deal with the same kinds of issues that we deal with. A heavy patriarchal system, you're talking about miseducation, you're talking about language banning, you're talking about destruction of our spirituality. So even though, and the reason I'm sharing this because I've had fights with our own Hawaiians who go, you know, I don't want nothing to do with Native Americans. And I'm going, okay, you obviously have no idea of the history. The same poison that destroyed the Lakota is the same poison that destroyed our people's minds. And so in many ways, you know, there's a lot more congruency. There's a lot more ways in which we have similar struggles in regards to fight for example, revitalization of Hawaiian language in the educational system. That's very different than with Tonga, right? So in other words, just because politically we may have the same kind of history as Tonga, the issues that we deal with many times and the socioeconomic issues as a people are more like the Lakota. And that's my point is, like, I don't think it's an easy saying it's either left or right, but instead it's kind of like we kind of got to step back and really be clear. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the political history? Are we talking about United Nations? Are we talking international law? Are we talking about revitalization of language? Are we talking about being so-called Oiwi as from the inside out? And so these all don't fit in the same way. And I think we just kind of gotta like continue to communicate and continue to debate and continue to talk and always be unafraid to refer to the context in which we're speaking to anyway. So okay, that's my 2 cents. So.
Thank you. Okay, before I get some closing words from each of you, the person who we picked to receive the $200 cash prize has not called in, has not emailed in. So, Kalekoa, can you pick a number from 1 to 195?
I take the 195.
195. Okay. Thank you. Starting from this morning, Kalekoa, do you have any last parting words you want to leave with us?
I just couldn't say I'm always impressed with the research, impressed with the voices, and I think Donovan, we all at all times can learn. We all at all times can share, and I think that is the cornerstone for the return of ʻokoʻa to our people is really to continue to educate ourselves, continue to listen, continue to share, and no matter what, even if we have disagreements, even we have different ideas, we still one lahui and one aloha for all of us. So that's my main closing point.
Thank you. Umi, you have any last words?
Yeah, I think I'll address the question that I didn't address before, which was about what people can do in the lahui, like what can we do? And it also connects to the Mauna Kea, the image of the summit. I always think about the lahui as a large, like a pyramid. And I think in 1993, at the 100th anniversary, people were thinking about the pinnacle of the pyramid, like who's going to be the king? I want to be the king, and who's going to be the minister of this and that. But in 2002, I think Honolulu Magazine had a title article that said, "What happened to Hawaiian sovereignty?" And I think the answer is that people moved into the base of the pyramid and they started to do the hard work and the very, very unglamorous work of building up the foundation of the pyramid. And the big one, the big gaping hole there is economics, I would say. And not to say that it's all about economics, but that's one that not enough work has been done on. Education, we've had a lot. There were no Hawaiian charter schools in 1993. That's huge. Hawaiian language revitalization, immersion. So what people can do is find their layer of the pyramid to work on. And it's not going to be, glamorous. There's not going to be much glory, but slowly the pyramid gets built. And that's how we see it. So that's why I think the image of Mauna Kea and Kukia'i Mauna is very appropriate in a symbolic sense.
Thank you, Umi. How about you, Mano? Any last words?
Yes, I just want to say mahalo Yauko. I'm really very honored to be associated with this group of leaders. We've been around for a long time and know each other's ohana. So I'm just very touched and very hopeful for our kingdom. And I think we're going in the right trajectory and just, persevere. So mahalo nui loa and mahalo, Bobby, for being that go-between and handling all of this, and everybody else who's involved in the technology side especially.
Thank you. Donovan, last words?
Just mahalo to everyone for everyone out there listening, everyone behind the scenes who organized and put this together and allowed for these kinds of conversations to be had, to allow all of us to place ourselves in the genealogy of our ancestors that have been in this fight and in this struggle. And we're, here we are today placing ourselves and connecting to that genealogy. So mahalo to everyone.